Next week, the United States turns 250 years old. And the country is going to spend July 4th telling itself a story about itself. And there's going to be more than one story. And they won't agree. And a good half of the people watching won't recognize the country the other half is describing. Chapter 17 is about exactly this. It's 4 rungs on a ladder, and it puts leadership somewhere on that ladder, and it doesn't let you stand outside the thing you're looking at. It's one of the shortest chapters in the whole book of Daodejing. It might be the one that reads our particular moment the most plainly. So let's get into it. This podcast works through the 81 chapters of the Daodejing one at a time, not as history, not as philosophy to understand and set aside, but as a practice manual for living. No belief required, no doctrine, just what can be noticed, sat with, and verified in your own experience. You don't need to have heard the earlier episodes, just start here. Tao will meet you where you are. The companion app is now on the App Store and Google Play. Meditation timer, journal, podcast, foundational texts, all in one place. Search for Tao with Ian Felton. I've been watching the run-up to the anniversary. Not the day, the run-up. The narratives getting built. Everybody assembling the version of the 250 years that they're going to need on the 4th. And I noticed something in my own body while I watched. There's a pull to find the golden age, the stretch where it was good, where we were who we say we were before whatever went wrong went wrong. For some people, that golden age is the founding. For some, it's the war years. For some, it's a decade I'm too young to have lived in. Everybody's reaching for theirs. I felt myself reaching too. And then I caught it. Because the reach has a flavor, and I know the flavor. It's the same one I get when I'm sitting and a thought comes that says, remember when the practice was easy? Remember the good sit you had last spring? It's nostalgia, and nostalgia is just an ache pointed backward. It feels like memory. It's actually a refusal to be where I am. So I sat with the run-up to the 4th, the way I'd sit with anything. I let the reach come up, and I didn't follow it back. I just stayed in the moment, in the country I'm actually in, on the rung of the ladder we're actually on. That's the Tao moment, not a conclusion, just declining to leave. Chapter 17 of Daodejing, I title Great Leaders. And here's my translation. The greatest leaders. Those below know he exists. The next are loved and praised. The next are feared. The next are despised. Insufficient trustworthiness creates distrust. Unhurried, they hoard words. The work completes, affairs resolve, and the 100 clans say, we did it ourselves. Just one thing to mark before we sit with that translation, because the whole chapter hangs on it. The first rung, Daoshang, sometimes also uses the character Tai Shang, the best, the highest. And what makes him the best is the line right after. 下知有知. So those below knew only that he existed, not loved, not admired, barely registered. The descent then goes, Qin, drawn close and praising, then feared, then despised. Praise is already the second rung. The moment people are applauding, something has already fallen. And the lost feeling, the final line. 百姓皆为我自然. The 100 clans all said, we did it ourselves. 自然, here, in the people's own mouths, plain speech, we did this. That's the signature of the top rung. Not the leader felt, the people's own agency felt. Hold those two. Barely there at the top, we did it ourselves at the bottom of the text. Everything in the discussion lives between those two. So let's put the country, United States, on the ladder. Carefully, because there's a way to do this that's a lie before it even begins. Here's the discipline that has to go in first. America never sat at Daodejing, at the top rung of the ladder. There's no rung at the top of our history where leadership was barely felt and the people walked around full of their own agency, not even really knowing who governed them. Doesn't exist. The moment this episode lets you imagine a golden age we fell from, I've handed you nostalgia. And nostalgia, I said it already, it's the same enemy. Story as the conspiracy, just pointed backward instead of sideways. So we're not tracking a fall from the top. We're tracking a slide around in the lower rungs. That's the honest version. The closest we ever came was the high tier, loved and praised. It'd be roughly the New Deal through the early post-war years. Trust in government was around 3/4 of the public, all the way into the mid-60s. People felt the nation was theirs, that the we included them. But the chapter makes you cut again, and you have to take the cut. That love tier was real for the enfranchised and a lie for everyone Jim Crow shut out. The we did it ourselves was handed out unevenly. For some, the agency was felt. For others, the felt thing was already, this is being done to us. So even the high water mark was partial. A half-felt trust is a brittle trust, and brittle things break hard. Then the first crack, down to the next rung, down to feared. The inflection is documented and sharp. The credibility gap, the Pentagon Papers, the tapes. This is the chapter's diagnostic line running in broad daylight. When trust runs short, distrust follows. Not that the leaders turned evil, that the gap between what was said and what was done became visible. And once a thing like that is visible, it spreads on its own. Trust in government fell off a cliff in that decade and never structurally came back. Nobody designed that. It was exposure. The words and the acts pulled apart where everyone could see. And from there, the long slide. The decision-making quietly relocates toward the lobby, toward the donor, toward the permanent campaign that replaces actually governing. Then the money gets formally turned loose. Citizens United, 2010, the super PAC architecture behind it. And here's where, if you've ever felt that your vote selects someone who then answers to people you will never meet, that feeling's not paranoia. It's a reading on the gauge. That is the precise mechanism by which we did it ourselves flips over into its opposite. Agency was the signature of the top rung. The sense that the lever you pull isn't connected to the outcome is the photographic negative of it. Which brings us to the bottom. Vulture, despised. And here's where I have to give you the harder read, because it's the more useful one. The easy story is, some people made this. Some people designed the division to keep us fighting. And I understand the pull of that story. It's bearable. It has an enemy in it. It organizes the mess. But the chapter has no designer anywhere on the ladder. What it offers instead is more uncomfortable than a plot. Division isn't authored. Division is the cheap fuel that's just lying around at the bottom rungs. Fear and contempt are simply more efficient to mobilize than the quiet trust at the top. They cost less. They move faster. They convert better. Money doesn't need to design division. It only needs to discover that outrage is the highest yield input and then tilt toward it. Cable to talk radio to the feed is that till running at full saturation, which is also exactly the violation of the chapter's quietest line. Unhurried, they hoard words. The top rung figure barely speaks. But modern leadership never stops speaking. And a lot of what it's speaking is contempt. By this line, the saturation itself is the descent, the permanent feed, the leader who never closes his mouth. That's not a feature of bad leadership. That is the falling. And both halves of the country failed this line identically. Nobody's quiet. Nobody holds their words precious. Everybody's talking all the time, mostly in contempt. So the bottom rung isn't where a designer put us. It's the resting state a trust-depleted, speech-saturated, money-optimized system settles into on its own. And that's harder to live with than a conspiracy. A conspiracy you could expose. Gravity you just have to feel. And underneath all of it, every rung drop did the same single thing. It converted "we did it ourselves" into "it was done to us." That's the wound, not the division. The division is downstream. The disarray right now is not fundamentally that the country is split into two halves. It's that neither half experiences self-arising agency anymore. Both halves experience being acted upon. And each one has gone and located the actor in the other half. The contempt is two halves, each pointing across the aisle, each saying, "You are the reason I have no agency." Now here's the turn, and this is the one that doesn't let you stay in your chair as a spectator. Despised is not a verdict that the despising half hands down on bad leadership from somewhere outside the system. To despise is to occupy the bottom rung as a participant. The contempt is not a report on the field. It's a position in the field. And it's the lowest one. When you feel that contempt rise, and it's real, and it's earned, and the conditions that produced it are documentable, I'm not taking any of that from you, but it's still the bottom rung, and sitting in it is taking part in the very disarray you're grieving. The chapter doesn't ask whether your contempt is justified. It treats contempt as the symptom, never the cure. So the gauge reads both directions at once, and the half that despises is enacting the disarray it's diagnosing. And here's the thing I keep wanting to climb away from. Because the history is so satisfying, the ladder is so clean, I could stay up there in the systems and the dates and Citizens United and let you admire it from a safe distance. But if this episode ends in 2010, it has retreated. The history was the setup. The body is this chapter. So come back down into your own chest where the contempt actually lives. There's no going back to the garden. There was never a Daodejing to return to. Not for the country, and not in old China either. The people who wrote this chapter weren't writing from the top rung. They were writing from the warring states, the Zhou order in pieces, the schools all shouting at once because the center had failed. They invented a lost golden age from inside the rubble, the same move I caught myself making about the 4th of July. They were on the bottom rung too. That's not a coincidence to admire. That's just company with people from long ago in history. What's not closed is the one place the donor class can't reach and the feed can't optimize and no designer can author. The felt sense of your own next action. Tsuran, we did it ourselves, doesn't come back at the scale of the country first. It comes back at the scale of the next thing you actually do. Chosen. Felt as chosen. That's recoverable. That was always the only place it was ever recoverable from. So this 4th of July, when the story gets told and you feel the contempt rise, and you can feel it, there's nothing to fix about feeling it. You can also notice that the contempt is a reading on a gauge, and the gauge is reading you too. You can let the reach for the golden age come up and decline to follow it backward. And you can put your hand on the one thing the whole machine can't touch, which is the next small thing you do, done because you chose it. The country is 250. We were never barely governed and free. We're not going back to a garden that wasn't there. But the next action is yours. And it always was. Daodejing, 下之有之，其次进而御之，其次谓之，其次侮之。信不足焉，有不信焉。忧兮其贵言，共成事遂。百姓皆谓我自然。